Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back for members of the planning board, and thanks to the public for your patience as we entered executive session. While people are rejoining, I'm just going to quickly hit on our agenda for this evening, and it is all administrative items. But first, we do have some discussion with regards to performance guarantee estimate, Form K lot release for Whisper Way. Then we will move to voting as to what zoning articles we would like to add to the town meeting warrant. And I'm hoping all but one of those are exactly what they were last time. And so I'm hopeful that we can move through most of those pretty quickly and save the bulk of our discussion for the changes to the proposed changes to the solar bylaw. And then we had a couple of other quick meeting updates with regards to our requests for funding for the planning board, the planning board annual report review. Mr. Paul had a request to consider changing the name of the planning board. We've got some subcommittee updates from the subcommittees that we recently established. And then we have a handful of minutes to review and potentially approve. So hopefully, my hope is a pretty quick meeting tonight. I'd like to be wrapped up by 9 o'clock, particularly with the early start. But let's start things out with Whisper Way. And I see Mr. Nation is here. I see Mr. Paradis is here. And maybe just to start, Mr. Gelsich, can you just walk us through? I know there was some late back and forth today, but can you just give us a quick status update as to where we are on this bond?
Sure. So Beta supplied a bond estimate on January 5th or 6th that set the amount at about 112,000. And the nations, I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring up the current estimate, but my Adobe is not working. The nations have done additional work, and they would like to have that estimate reduced further. And there was just some back and forth between Beta and the nations about that estimate. And hopefully I can bring up the current one and we can share that. But it looks like my Adobe is still freezing. So I think Chris Nation and Phil would probably be able to better explain what their conversations were today and what the resolution, if any, is for those conversations.
All right, maybe we'll start with Mr. Nation. And Chris, you are muted. So Mr. Gelsich can unmute you.
So Chris, I don't actually have the ability to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Chris, can you hear us?
Hello, good evening.
All right, we hear you.
So to back up, I'm looking at Beta's review, and the first one, which might be an easier one, is the sidewalk top coat, which is complete. I think that's maybe something that needs to be verified by Beta still. I think when they were out, they didn't realize that, just didn't, I'm not sure what the conditions were, but that wasn't realized, I believe. Another one is another easy one, I think, is the stop sign. So there, it says 2 regulatory signs, but there is a street sign at the beginning. We just need a stop sign still. So I reduce that from the 1, from 2 to 1. And then the bigger piece here that I wanted to make sure we all got right was planting of trees. And that was, Beta had done a calculation just by the numbers. Given that it was a 1,000-foot road, they did the, I believe Phil plugged in something, the 30 or maybe 40-foot intervals, and just as a standard calculation had decided how many trees should be there. And what we supplied was a little rendering by Larry Green, kind of showing where some of those locations just don't work, and that's at the entrance. We have the wetlands crossing, which is a block wall, so there is no shoulder, so to speak, to plant a tree. As you continue up the road, then there's a second wetlands. There's a second crossing that captures water from the right side and brings it to the lower. And there again, there's a guardrail, no actual shoulder, and that we have a block wall. Continuing on a little further up road, then we go into the parking area for Cameron Trails. And there again, it's a fairly long distance there where there's no, good opportunity to plant a tree given that it's a parking area. That particular parking area does have one nice tree in it, if we can, maybe I'll picture that. And then as I continue on up the road, I have other obstacles, driveway aprons, transformers, ledge outcroppings that just don't make planting a tree feasible. So there is a landscape plan. I'm not sure if John's able to show that, but an updated one. And that simplifies, I think, the view of what I'm trying to explain. One thing I overlooked as we come into the neighborhood, on the left-hand side is the detention basin, and we are showing 11 arborvitaes with one street tree mixed in there, and those are intended to shield the view of the pond. That pond is there on the left, in roughly 300 feet on the left as you come up the road. And so basically the red are the trees that we would say don't work because there is either no shoulder, or the shoulder is so abbreviated with the town forest land right there that it doesn't work to plant. And then the green is where I propose to actually do the planting for some useful screening and try to capture the intent of the bylaw. And these locations came up with, actual field conditions. I take the plan and understand what's expected of us and walk around up there and pace things off, put stakes in the ground and say, okay, wait a minute, a tree works here, it doesn't work there. And that's where this final proposal comes from. And I think the only other piece to that comes to mind is I'm been responsible for a handful of roads in town, and I'm well aware of what's expected. And I think that the things I've done in the past have all, been proper and been what everyone expected and looked good when we were done. And I think with that,
Right.
that might be where I can leave it off for comments, and maybe Phil steps in.
Yeah, let's, I'd love to hear, again, try to rely as much as possible on our professionals here. So, Mr. Paradis, do you want to just go ahead and comment or react to Mr. Nation's proposal to request a pretty substantial reduction in the number of trees to be planted?
Yeah. So, excuse me. I just wanted to follow up on the other two items that Chris had mentioned. So Chris had mentioned the sidewalk, which we had not anticipated being top coated at this time. One is we weren't, I don't think we were notified, or for whatever reason, we don't have an observation report of the installation of either the gravel, the binder, or the top course for the sidewalk. So I don't recommend reducing, they got a lot of construction to do and, and such. So I think we should keep the sidewalk top course item just in case they have to do some patching or whatever. The second item was the stop sign and the regulatory sign. I guess Bob had missed the seeing the street sign was already up. So I agree that we should reduce the signs from 2 to 1. And then finally, the trees. So the bylaw and also the detail on the plan says that trees shall be planted every 40 feet. So all we did was the math, as Chris had mentioned. The first 300 feet or so are predominantly a wetland crossing, and there will be retaining walls right up against, and it's supposed to minimize the amount of disturbance of the wetlands. So I don't see where we could plant trees in that section. But then going up the street, we didn't actually observe, where a tree could go or whatever. But our maths indicates that 700 feet on two sides of the road at 40 feet spacing requires 35 trees. I think we reduced it to 32, if I'm not correct, on the two different species. So I think that's the difference where we're at right now. And we counted the plan for the arborvitae around the detention basin showed whatever we estimated, 25 plants, and they were pretty tight. These the new plan looks like they're spread out enough, and also mentioned that the new plan also shows trees at about 100-foot spacing. So that's the difference.
So the proposal, the counter proposal for Mr. Nation is trees that would be at approximately 100 feet spacing instead of the 40 feet, which is what the special permit calls for.
Right, and then he's also eliminating the first, 3/4 of 600 feet of the road or something.
Oh, 600. The first 600 feet, not the first 300 feet?
Yeah, if you look at his plan, he's got red trees, which are the ones that he doesn't think needs to be put in. So, and only the green trees are the ones he's putting in. So,
Okay.
I think the first tree is probably about 700 feet. But
So,
to be fair, I haven't been on site to see. He's got plans here, but I don't know how close those trees are to the road.
yeah. Okay. So to me, there's three primary points of contention here. One is the sidewalk, which I understand it's complete, but to Mr. Paradise's point, there's certainly still a lot of construction and driveways and access and whatnot, plus the lack of observation. Again, hopefully nothing happens to it, but that's one point of contention. The second is the number of street trees, being the oaks and lindens. And then I think the third point of contention is the giant arborvitaes to screen the retention basin. So really quickly, I guess maybe we'll open this up to questions from the planning board. And I'll hold off on my comments. Let other folks have a chance to either just to share their perspective, or if they have a potential proposal or solution to how we come to the terms on this. Anybody from the planning board have any thoughts?
Sure.
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
I'd like to see the trees get installed. Maybe not exactly where they were supposed to be, but I would think within proximity somewhere that we could get them installed.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Any other questions or comments from the board members? And please speak up. With this display, I can't see everybody. I can only see a subset of people.
Through the chair, this is Rob. Is the 112K number the amount the bond is looking to be reduced, or is that the total current bond? I'm unclear.
So this is the first time we do a bond. So this is the initial bond estimate.
And what is the reduction amount request?
Ballpark, it is about $25,000 reduction. I'm looking at 6 plus 3.5 plus 12.5 plus 3.5. And Rob, just for perspective, again, that's $6,100 for the sidewalk, reduction of oak trees of $3,365, reduction of the linden street trees of $12,320, and then reduction of the arborvitae's for $3,458. So, I'll just jump in here and share my perspective. I think I would like to see the approximate number of trees retained, and I realize there might be some obstacles and some reasons, and I think to me that just can, I think that it's appropriate to plant some a little closer than others. I'm all for not having them along that wetland impact, but an average of 1 tree per 100 feet doesn't sound like a lot to me. And if there are obstacles, whether it be curb cuts or other things, then I don't see issues with having some increased density of trees as appropriate. The arborvitae's, and I didn't hear, Mr. Nation, what was the rationale to reduce the number of arborvitae's? Because I don't understand what the rationale is to reduce that.
Am I on?
Yes, we can hear you.
So to drop to the question about the arborvitae's, these are planting around the pond. That pond is nestled within the forest. And so right up to the edges of the work, we have, standing tree, large, just trees, mix of oaks, maples, some pines, but it's within the woods. There is no view of any of the pond from the woods. I'm not, maybe perhaps not explaining that right, but the trees were cut and we've slid the pond in between the trees. So I would be essentially just planting an arborvitae, in the woods. Didn't seem to produce anything. Doesn't achieve any of the intent, which I believed was to create a buffer of some sort. And so where I do show the arborvitae, and there is one street tree within there, right close to the road, is where you would gain some shielding of, a car or people walking up and down the street that would help shield the pond. I think it's important to keep in mind, I don't have a scalable plan of where these trees lay out, but they're certainly not spaced 100 feet, but you can't plant a tree where there's a driveway. You can't plant a tree where there's an electrical transformer. Can't plant a tree where there's a hydrant. I'm pretty confident that these spots that I show are what the intent of the rule is. Much of this road has a very abbreviated shoulder where we're tight to the woods there. There is no opportunity to be planting a tree if it just doesn't fit. I'm not sure where to go with that. I certainly put my heart and soul into things like this. Once I get involved, I went out there personally, and as if I was doing the job, okay, how many trees can I plant? And I walk around and I put a stake in the ground and say, okay, this works, and this doesn't. And so this plan reflects what I think is the best opportunity here. I can absolutely promise everyone here that I want this to look better than anyone here does, certainly better than the rules are written for the town. I am highly motivated to make it look better. The problem I have is I can't agree to something that I can't do. And I certainly can't agree to numbers that I would be held to, and again, not able to perform later. And so maybe there's an opportunity where I go to do the job and I say, geez, you know what? Maybe I can put 2 here and not 1 on a certain distance between a existing driveway and, say, a fire hydrant. But I wouldn't want that once the numbers are on this bond, I'm stuck with them. And then I have to, the fight just gets worse. And it becomes more unclear later.
Yeah. So Mr. Nation, if I can just comment really quickly, because I think part of it is that the special permit says 1 tree per 40 feet. If I do the math here on the 700 feet of remaining road, not including the initial 300 feet, that's approximately 1,400 feet on both sides, 32 trees in total, which is what Beta is recommending. That would be 1 tree every 42 feet or so. If I look at your estimate, that would be a total of 11 trees over 1,400 feet. That's 1 tree every 127 feet. So I think that's where I'm struggling here, is that the scale just seems totally off. And I get the fact that you might have some situations where a tree doesn't make sense. But maybe the tree needs to be moved 10 feet in one direction, or it just doesn't, going from an average of 1 tree per 40 feet to 1 tree per 127 feet just doesn't feel like it's aligned with the purpose and spirit of the special permit.
Through the chair.
Yes, Dave.
I'd like to offer, if the board would be amenable to it, to meet with Mr. Nation and anybody from the town and actually stake out some locations for trees, because it's only a couple miles from my house.
Okay.
Through the chair.
Yes, Jane.
It sounds to me like it's really inappropriate to put trees there that are going to die if you put them in an inappropriate spaces. Is there a possibility where you could trade out and place back, maybe within the public space, smaller bushes like azaleas or rhododendrons or something like that, where you could still get the screening and some appropriate screening, but not have it seems silly to plant a tree that's just going to die because it's in a wetland or a curbside or someplace where it can't grow.
I think that's a great idea, Jane. I don't know if the trees that are being proposed will necessarily, again, I'm not sure that it's a function of they can't be moved slightly, as opposed to they're going to be planted in ledge that they're not going to grow. But I do like the idea of possibly considering something
on my
beyond.
property, and if the soil isn't right, or it's too wet, or it's too dry, or drainage, or there's other areas, the tree is just going to die. So would it be appropriate or just feasible? Could we talk about putting in some other kind of plantings that might be appropriate? I'm curious to see what Mr. Nation would think about something like that.
Mr. Nation, do you have a response?
I'm not sure that there's a need for anything specific different than trees. I don't know where this distance came up, but when I'm looking at my plan, remember this road's only 1,000 feet, and I have the parking area for the trails is up 2/3 of the way up. What I'm saying is trees don't fit anywhere up to that parking area. And there's a tree right in the middle of that parking area, which would be in a location where you would normally plant a tree. So, some of these situations are covered by mistake, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
So
not going to come across verbally, and apparently the plan isn't resonating with anyone.
yeah.
I think the only thing is a site walk is the only thing I'm hearing. Someone has to see it to understand it.
So that's just what I was going to propose. And I don't know if we necessarily need to plan a full planning board site walk, but since Mr. Paul offered, and I know that Mr. Paul is a big advocate for trees, what I'd be content with at this point is that the developer meet with Mr. Paul at some point, and others are welcome to join, and come back at our next meeting. I'd like to hear Mr. Paul's recommendation as to what is appropriate for trees at that point in time. And I guess my thought is I think that, to your point, Chris, maybe we're just being irrational here. I have a hard time going against the advice of our engineer. But if Mr. Paul goes out there and says, yeah, Mr. Nation's right, this just doesn't make sense and this is an appropriate number, then I think that feels like a good way to kind of come to agreement on what is appropriate here. Fran?
Mr. Chair, would it also make sense for Bill or somebody from the Beta team to accompany Mr. Paul and Mr. Nation?
So, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say something. Phil messaged and said that they could send their landscape architect out for the sidewalk.
Okay, I think that'd be great.
And then we can also look at the sidewalk too.
Okay.
And to echo you, Mr. Chair, we're all very reasonable people. If a tree doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. But I find it hard to believe that a brand new road can't fit some trees on it. So call me a skeptic, but.
Okay. So Dave, do you have a proposed time? I mean, is this a Saturday morning kind of thing for you?
What works best for the other folks? As long as I know in advance. And we can do Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, like we do our site walks.
Yeah. Chris, does that work okay for you?
Sounds great.
Phil, would that work okay for your landscape architect?
I would have to check with him, but
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and hold off and appreciate the discussion. But Dave, Chris, and Phil, if you guys can coordinate through John, then let's go ahead and reconvene on this topic.
And for you, Mr. Chair, just once I get a date and time, I can forward it to the rest of the planning board in case anybody's interested, or John can, either way.
Yeah, through the chair, I also agree with Jane that sometimes where you put an arborvitae, a rhododendron or an azalea can create a beautiful, blocking of visual blocking in between the trees, which sometimes in these large forested areas with the taller trees is a visual eyesore, can have a visual eyesore. So where you might not think an arborvitae would be appropriate, there may be some visual impairment from the house, on the other side of the woods. So I would recommend having Jane go out if Jane's not busy on Saturday, and casting her eye on it as well, because she has very specific ideas that I would support in that view.
Okay. So let's go ahead and tentatively plan for Saturday, 9 a.m. We'll confirm with the Beta landscape architect. And again, for people that have an interest here, please feel free to attend. So Dave, thanks for the suggestion. I appreciate your offer to do that. I think that's a good way to provide some clarity and reasonableness to this discussion. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the zoning articles, proposed zoning articles for town meeting. And again, I think it's important to note that this is, we will also be scheduling a public hearing to discuss the details of these zoning articles. What we have before us tonight is to determine which of these we would like to put on the town meeting warrant, which is actually due to the town on February 2nd. So I'm hoping only one of these has changed. And Mary, I'll go ahead and turn to you to walk us through these.
Okay.
And I think, again, what I'd like to do, in the past, we've gotten ourselves into a little bit of trouble by trying to group these into one to vote on them. So I know this is going to add a little bit of time, but I'd rather actually go through each one individually and vote on it, just to avoid those circumstances that we've had in the past.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, just to keep everything nice and clean, and plus it gives me some practice in pronouncing everyone's names properly.
Okay, great.
Through the chair, can I ask one question first?
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, I think it's more clarification for everybody. So all of the articles besides the solar voltaic had approved, we're going to send to last town meeting, but we decided to pull back because of COVID and the reduction in time we were shooting for, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, I'm ready to vote.
Okay. Yes, and I was going to start with that preamble. So,
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
And I totally support that notion, Mary and Rob. Does it make sense to start with the commercial solar as opposed to have it at the end of a long list of zoning? Just so everybody's fresh when we talk about the one that, or one of the ones that may be more complicated or have more interest?
I think that's a great call, Mary Ellen. I know that I see that we have some members of the public that I think are also interested in the solar. So Mary, is that okay with you if we start with the solar one and then, and then I guess maybe as a compromise, since we're going to have a public hearing anyways, maybe we can kind of fast track the other ones that are all exactly the same that we have discussed
Right.
multiple times before.
Yeah, that was the idea, is that we fast track the other ones, but we can go ahead and start with solar. So,
so can I just clarify? I was actually asking about when we order them for town meeting. So I'm not too concerned about us being fresh tonight, but I'm all about doing it first. But does it make sense to order it for town meeting to go first?
if we can. John, is that possible?
I think the town moderator has that.
No, no.
I'll talk to Elaine and just see how the best way to do that is. Because I just kind of submit all of them to her. And I don't know if it's just the order that she gets them via email that she puts them in the list.
Is it already finalized, John? I'm sorry if I'm being difficult.
No, it's not. Nope, I haven't sent her any of these yet.
Oh.
So okay. I can send them all in one and say, can we do the solar one first?
Yeah, I think we can make that recommendation.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt before we even start. Go, Mary.
Okay, so are we starting with solar?
We're starting with solar.
Okay, we are starting with solar. So, and I also, based on what you said to me, Gary, offline, was I told people that we're not discussing them in detail tonight because we are just voting to do a placeholder, and that so I wasn't expecting to wordsmith it with everybody tonight. But
Yes.
if you want to, we can. So
Nope, we do not want to wordsmith.
Okay.
We have a public hearing for that process. For now, it is only whether we choose to put really the topic and primary intent on the town meeting warrant.
Okay, so I will just let you know very briefly how we arrived at the way the solar bylaw changes are proposed currently. So through the process that Zach went in the last several months, our objectives were to balance the needs of both landowners who wish to develop their land with landowners who are abutters or neighboring properties and wish to have, less visual and other disturbance to their views and areas. In addition, we really strongly wished to minimize the clear cutting of trees. And whether or not the law sees it this way, we saw that clear cutting for the purpose of solar development is very different than clear cutting for the purposes of building a building. The law doesn't see it that way in terms of state statutes, but it really is very different from the way that it looks to the public and to neighboring properties. Having a building, there's generally less clear cutting necessary to do a building. There's also interspersed trees when people do landscaping, but all of those things don't happen with solar. It's all gone. There's no trees in the middle, giving some visual interest and things like that, as well as habitat. So unfortunately, many of our ideas did get shot down by legal. And the ultimate reason is that because of the way the state laws are written, we cannot treat solar development differently than other development. That means that we cannot even say only solar only in industrial A and B, for instance, because we think of them, hey, they're commercial. Why can't we restrict them to just the commercial zones? Because our industrial zones are so much smaller than the rest of the land in Hopkinton, our legal counsel advised us that that would probably not be defensible. So that's one example. And by extrapolation, also an overlay district, unless we had a good 50% of the town in it or more, an overlay district would run into some of the same problems. I am paraphrasing, of course. But the two last meetings of the ZAC, you can always go back and watch the tapes, and our lawyers were there, and you can hear language directly from them to get more of a very clear legal picture on this. Okay, so essentially, not being able to limit things on solar specifically, we could not include anything that limited tree cuttings beyond what we have here. So we couldn't, that is why, legal counsel actually suggested having a separate tree protection or clear cutting bylaw, which would apply to all development, not just solar development. So we could not include it in the solar bylaw, anything to protect trees specifically, because otherwise it would be, too different. Okay. So that's the background of where we came to. We discussed all of the different options, but ultimately what we could be allowed to do legally was simply increase the burden in terms of screening. And so what we did is we beefed up screening for both noise, visual effects. That includes glare, and we put in some measurements that need to take place that we don't normally get with solar, but we had some very good recommendations from various SAC members and other people who did a lot of research about sightline elevations that should be presented to us, so we can actually see a diagram of what you can see from a particular location to the solar array, and what is going to be put in between those for screening purposes. So it's a lot of things to help the planning board assess whether or not the screening will be sufficient as proposed. As opposed to just seeing it on a two-dimensional plan. Yeah, there's trees there, but really not having any idea whether or not the elevation of the land makes the trees kind of irrelevant, that sort of thing. So having these different types of measurements required to be given to the planning board in order to make the assessment is a big part of these changes as well.
So Mary, can I just paraphrase really quickly? And I just want to make sure people understand that the Zoning Advisory Committee went through a lot of different options, and recognizing that other towns have things like very restrictive solar overlays, it's important to note that those have not been challenged in court. They likely have not been challenged in court because the value of the land doesn't warrant a challenge. And I think that what Zach has done is they've flushed through all of that. What they've come to is two conclusions, or two reasons that are two concerns that people have with solar. One is people don't want to see it, and two is that people don't want to cut down trees. And so, the way they're approaching this is this bylaw is to all but eliminate the likelihood that people are going to see it, and it puts in place a lot of additional requirements for developers to accurately portray what will be visible, what will be heard, whether that be with regards to elevation and buffer zones and screening and, things like off of Alexandria Road where they have a wall of solar going up a hill. All that would be required to be represented by the applicant. And then on the tree clearing piece, which isn't a part of this, we're not going to discuss it in detail tonight, but there is a proposed general bylaw that would actually protect trees across all of our zones. So I really want to give a lot of credit to Mary and Zach because I know how difficult of a process this is, but I think they've done a great job of identifying what the primary issues are with solar and, working with town council and a lot of different perspectives to make sure that solar proposals in the future are going to reduce or eliminate the visual concerns that people have and potentially the tree clearing nature of some of these proposals as well. So I don't think I summarized. I probably just repeated a lot of what Mary said. But,
through the chair.
But Muriel, we'll start with Muriel. I know she had her hand raised. Muriel?
Yeah, so I have, so I don't doubt that you have all worked really hard on this, and I appreciate all of it. And I will certainly go back and watch the 2 meetings, honestly, so I can hear the discussion. I appreciate that. But as far as limiting uses to zones, that's what zoning does all the time. So that argument just doesn't, on the surface, doesn't sort of sway me. We all the time say that things can't happen all over town, but they can happen in certain zones. And this is a commercial use. And I think fundamentally that's what we heard from the public, is that they wanted to keep commercial uses like this from being planted in residential areas. So I'm a little confused about that assertion.
Mary, do you want to respond to that, or would you like me to?
I can a little bit, but again, I definitely recommend looking at those tapes. And basically what the lawyer said, if, I'm again paraphrasing, is that solar has been given a very special place in Massachusetts statute. And that is why it is not defensible to have it, because it is allowed everywhere, all zoning districts, according to statute. And that it cannot be treated differently than other developments, pardon me. So that was his rationale.
That's true. I'm not arguing with you, Mary. I'm gonna watch, but that's true of everything. You have to have a place for zoning. You have to have a place for it, and as long as you have a place for it, you're not vulnerable to it everywhere. So I anticipate a vibrant conversation on this point.
Absolutely. And I also recommend that we have town council there on March 1st.
I do too.
Yeah. It's really, really helpful for them to, from that, use the legal language and tell all of us what the rationale is. So,
Mr. Gelsich, you unmuted your mic and I had a question for you, but I think you might answer my question without me asking it.
Maybe not, but I did just want to say that in addition to what Mary was saying, it wasn't so much that town council was saying you can't restrict solar to only the industrial B or industrial A. It's that if you only restrict it to the industrial areas, it's harder to defend in court. And they're also going off of this has never been brought up in court. It's harder to defend in court that you're allowing enough development of that, or enough areas for development of that to be not unreasonably restricting solar.
Right.
That was what they were saying to us.
And
it was kind of the same issue we had with the overlay district is what is the justification for only restricting it to those areas?
Yeah.
And you would have to come up with that justification, and every justification that Zach kind of brought up in the past and in the meeting, town council was like, eh.
Yeah. Well, there's no such thing as not allowed. It's just what can be defended. And
Oh.
that's what he was saying. That was his rationale for all of it. Yeah. What can be
Right.
defended in court.
And John, just to clarify, there are other uses that are not restricted by zone. And I think religious institutions is one of them, if I'm not correct.
Right.
Yep.
I feel like there's one or two more.
Schools and religious institutions and daycares, but
And
that's
solar.
not what these are.
No,
But
but
solar enjoys the same type of protection as
Yeah.
those uses.
I don't think so.
Those uses are regulated under what's called the Dover Amendment, but
Right.
Solar in Section 3 of Chapter 40A does have similar, or Town Council has advised that it does have similar type of protections.
Mhm.
all right, Fran, sorry, actually, I think Sundar was first. Sundar, do you have a?
Yeah, through the chair, I was just going to echo, having been part of the discussions with Mary, I just wanted to echo your sentiments of how tireless, Mary's efforts were in plodding through this. It was challenging. I'll be honest, and eventually, in a certain sense, the path was actually made simpler. I wouldn't say easier. Simpler by the involvement of the legal counsel, who basically, in essence, cut down a lot of our proposals and simplified it by saying, if it doesn't stand scrutiny of the court, you pretty much can't have it. So, in a certain sense, it simplified it, and I think that's what both John and Mary have characterized here. But I just wanted to echo your kudos to Mary for this effort.
Fran?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just briefly, I'll also, Mary, appreciate the heavy lift here on this one. I know that it has been a lot of work. One question maybe for you and John is on the overlay district, right? I know legal is not crazy about it because it's hard to define the overlay district. What have other towns done around overlay districts, or have they not? Have they just defined specific zones where solar is allowable? It just feels like by having nothing, it seems like it's Groundhog's Day. I mean, it just goes back to they can put it anywhere.
Well, Weston and Wellesley in particular, has designated, it could be an overlay district or it could just be, a few parcels that have it allowed. And they've said, okay, you can put solar there. And that is the one where Gary was alluding to. It hasn't been challenged in court. So we don't know if it'd stand up in court, but the probability is that because of the value of the land there, it will not be challenged in court. So we really don't have the legal precedent to cite and to give us advice on. So that, again, that's the way town council looks at it, is that, yep, they got away with it, but it hasn't gone to court to stand up for it. Dave?
Oh, thanks.
Dave?
Yeah, I actually put my hand up for a while there, but I'll bring it down. So a couple things real quickly. First of all, like everybody else, thank you, Mary, and the board for doing so much work. And Gary, I thought what you said was really helpful. You didn't repeat what a lot of Mary said. You actually complemented each other very well because you were able to separate it into the two distinct areas of, screening versus clear cutting. But then I kind of agree with Muriel and Fran. There's a little bit of disappointment in me that basically not doing anything. And I understand why, but what I would like to do is be the devil's advocate and say, just because it's not defendable doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Because look at all these other towns, they're in better shape than we are. They may get challenged, but they're probably not. So, I mean, to me, I'd rather be a Wellesley and have that undefensible kind of a deterrent out there, which was what Muriel and Fran and I'm, pushing for as well. I mean, yeah, legal is going to say, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But I don't see the risk to the town by doing it, because if it is challenged, you could just back off anyway.
Yeah, so the risk is that if it's challenged and we lose, then we have no additional protections. And what town council has told us is that they think the likelihood of us losing is significant. I'm not going to say how much, and neither would they. But they don't see us being able to defend a an overlay of some type. And again, doesn't mean we can't try, we can take that risk, but if it's overturned, we have no protections. As
But through you,
opposed
Mr.
to
Chair, I'm
this, hang on one second.
I'm just
Just
not
hang on.
understanding. I'm just
Hang on,
asking
Dave,
for more
Dave, hang on.
clarity.
Dave, let me finish.
Yep.
As opposed to this approach that does actually give us some substantial improvements and lets us enforce one of the things that's most important. And the thought is that this actually likely gives us more protection than a overlay district would, because this is defensible in court. So Dave, go ahead.
Yep, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted more clarity from you. Why are you thinking one or the other, and why not both? I mean, you say if we lose it, we'd have no defense, but if we lose it and we have the zoning, it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I guess at that point, aside from the legal costs associated with defending something like this,
through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think there would be any legal costs, because it would be exactly like it's happened to us before. The selectmen would just come to us and say, basically, change your vote, which has happened before, and it didn't cost us anything.
Yeah, I don't think that's a responsible approach. And I'm a big believer. None of us are experts here. I'm not an attorney. I've never been to land court. I've never been to Superior Court, for that matter. And I tend to rely on our professional staff that we have. And again, they're not ones to force us to take one pathway or the other, but I take their recommendations to heart. And I feel like we better have a pretty clear rationale if we're going to go against their recommendation, of which, candidly, it's sometimes hard to get them to take a position on something. I think we've got to have a pretty clear rationale, and I would really caution us. I think that it can be a little reckless for us just to throw things out there and see what happens. Jane?
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank Mary and the ZAC crew for taking this challenge on. I know it was a very difficult and painful process. When they started off, they were like the planning board. They didn't really want to hear anything about it. But when they looked at the laws and the restrictions and some of the alternatives, they came up with some really groundbreaking alternatives and I agree with you, Gary, that would give us some substantial guidelines to make the solar arrays, wherever they might be amenable to the communities. If we have screening, if we have, site distance, if we have percentages of grades, we can find some common ground. And I also want to caution Dave, nothing is for free. And whenever you challenge the court system or the legal system, it's very, very expensive. And I don't think that our town wants to go down that road if we can all help it. So I really appreciate all of the work, all of the hard work that Zach put into this. And I would support this going forward.
Meryl, hang on one second.
Sure.
I just want to ask John a question, because I think the reality of it is that we do have a public, assuming that we move this forward, we will have a public hearing on it. And I think that we're going to have a lot more discussion then. And rather than repeating all the discussion we're having now in a public hearing, just my question for John is, again, what we're voting on tonight is not the specific language and details of this. It is simply that we are proposing to amend Article 31 of the commercial solar photovoltaic installations. And I guess I'm just wondering how much flexibility we have if we approve this, how much flexibility we have to make adjustments to it through the public hearing process.
So this is going to be something that the town council is going to have to answer, but I believe you can make wordsmithing and other, formatting changes. You can remove things, but I don't believe you can add significant like sections. You would have to work within what is proposed and change the language that's kind of in there and not really introduce new restrictions. Like, for example, we have the addition of a sightline requirement and a glare analysis and a noise analysis. You probably could not then add a different type of analyses, but you could change the requirements of those that are currently in there, the glare and the noise and all that kind of stuff. That is my interpretation of what can be changed, but town council would have obviously the more accurate one.
Okay. Muriel.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First, what is the deadline for having placeholders on the town meeting warrant for any articles that we want to put on?
Town meeting warrant closes on February 2nd.
So we would have to vote tonight to hold a spot for an overlay map if we wanted to converse about it.
Yes.
Okay.
And to that point, I don't know the timing that would be required for that. If you don't have an overlay map already drafted, that would be my concern.
Yeah, I think we have one that we could refer back
We do,
to.
but we have several iterations. But
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
in terms of a map versus language, I don't know if you can have just a map placeholder versus. I guess maybe you could. I'd have to talk to town council about that.
Oh. So I would really like to hold a place for both things, and that is not asserting that that I'm dismissing any of town council's advice or any of the hard work of anybody. I would just like to make sure that we have a place on the town meeting warrant for both of these approaches so that we can have the full conversation. And I'll apologize up front that I did not know Zach was contemplating really fundamentally changing the approach, and perhaps I missed that. I haven't gone to Zach meetings, so that's on me. But I also want to assert that towns all the time vote to allow things in different areas. And a lot of what we're talking about, if we have a town meeting vote, zoning articles, certainly not impossible to overturn, but they are a heavy lift. They're a 2/3 vote. And that is a substantial obstacle to overcome if somebody wanted to challenge it in court. I'm just, not that I want to set ourselves up for a legal challenge, but I'm just saying that towns get to choose where and how they want to allow development to happen. And it's a very sort of well-founded process.
Mr. Chair, can I just?
Yes, John, go ahead.
I think it would be helpful for those who are concerned about the overlay district to watch the ZAC meeting from last week. I forget what the date was now. Because town council really did kind of obviously give a better technical and legal explanation than I think some of us can pass along to this board. But there was definitely some skeptics on ZAC, and I think they were all pretty swayed by town council's explanation. So I think it would just be helpful for everyone to kind of be on the same page with that, to understand what town council was saying. They never really said you can't put an overlay district. It was more of an encouragement to do something else. They never said you couldn't put solar in a certain district, but I think they just explained it better than we can. So
that's totally fair. I appreciate that. And I will watch the meeting. I apologize that I didn't ahead of time.
And so, and again, the one other thing I'd add here is, as much as I put faith in our professional services that we have, I also put faith in our committees. And I know there were a lot of very, very strong, passionate minds that were a part of this, that have beaten this literally into the ground to try and figure out what the best option is. And the fact that Zach aligned on this approach gives me that much more confidence that this is the right way forward. I think we all sort of saw through the public hearing process some of the challenges with an overlay. and, you know, I just, you know, I think while it didn't end up getting debated at town meeting, I think that those challenges would have been exacerbated. And so again, I put some faith in our process and in our zoning advisory committee that they've done their due diligence, and their recommendation, I think, is a solid one.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
The way this is being presented to us, it's almost like we're not having the option of both this and the zoning district. And to Mariel's point, I would like to support both of those. And we're not giving that here tonight. It sounds like this replaces the zoning district.
So I think that we have two options here, and John, please correct me if I misspeak here, but I think that what we should do is we should, what I'm going to propose anyways, is that we take a vote on recommending these changes to the town warrant. And then maybe if people feel strongly, and I don't even know if we can do this with regards to, you know, I guess maybe that's a question for John. If there was another proposal for an additional bylaw change, what would the process be to also get that on the town warrant? Is that something we can discuss tonight, or is that a function of a separate meeting that we post that we then go discuss if we wanted to add something else to it?
So let me try and figure out what you're saying.
Okay.
If you're
All right.
trying to, are you trying to do like an overlay district or change the applicability to certain zoning districts? Or are you trying to also do additional language changes such as like screening and other stuff?
I'll
Can
defer to
I-
Dave on that.
Can I jump in here?
Hey.
This is Rob.
Hey, hang on, Rob. Let me just let Dave answer John's question there.
Well, I'm kind of going where Mariel is going, and yes, I didn't watch that committee, but yes, I'm also been blindsided because we were all under the impression up until tonight that, you know, we had this thing that we're going to try to put on the warrant last May, and it got pushed back. We just thought it would be deferred.
I have to.
Hang on.
Wait a minute.
Hang on.
I
Hang on.
watched all of Mary's.
did give
Hang
you
on, hang on, everybody, hang on, through the chair, please. So number one, Dave, I totally disagree with that statement, because our ask to Zach was to go back and rethink their strategy, given some of the problems that we had, and come back to us with the best recommendation that they had on how we update our zoning bylaws. So that was the direction we gave to Zach, and that was part of the public meeting process. And at least back in November, we did have an update from Zach, and I think that we were aware of some of the challenges that they were having and some of the debate about different ways of approaching this. So I do take a little bit of offense to the fact that I'm sorry if you weren't aware of it, but we have discussed it at several public planning board meetings in the past. And again, we also encourage people that had an interest to attend or sit in on those zoning advisory committees.
I would just look at it as it must have been a miscommunication on my part, because I thought everything they were doing was an addition to the zoning district.
Nope.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's my impression of it. I mean, you can
Okay.
shake your head, but.
All right, Rob, you had a comment?
Yeah, through the chair. So I think for tonight, what Dave and Muriel are suggesting is last summer before the town meeting, we had a map, we had a solar overlay district map. We were going to go to town meeting with it. We were in process of approving it for a town meeting, and then we pulled back. I think what the ask is could we do anything tonight if we wanted to have a placeholder on the warrant for such a map? Say it was that map as the starting point, or would we need another meeting to basically post that we were going to discuss that as a topic before February 2nd? Or is it just, or like, I want to know right now today, I think we should do something about solar should be on the town warrant. That's clear. But I think what I'm looking to get answered is, can we make any decisions tonight as broad as possible to cover us for any scenario that we'd want to get pushed forward.
John, if we wanted to add something substantially different from this proposed amendment, what would be the process to go about doing that?
I don't see why it wouldn't be able to get voted on tonight. I mean, it's something that the chair could not reasonably anticipate 48 hours before the meeting. It's a zoning article that needs to get added to the warrant. It's not a hearing. So if the board wanted to vote to add a placeholder, I don't see why that wouldn't be possible.
Could I ask one follow-up question through the chair?
Please.
And say we don't, like, say we discuss it at a future meeting or subsequent meetings about a solar overlay district, and we say, this is really a bad idea, and we don't want it on the warrant. Can we get it so it's not on the warrant at all? Like, people don't see it on the town warrant at the town meeting.
Yes, you can vote to remove an article from the warrant. I don't know what language remains in the actual warrant, the printed warrant itself.
But that's good enough, I think. That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that from a pathway forward, what I'd like to do, if people are amenable to this, is I think we can go ahead and take a vote on this proposed amendment. And then secondarily, maybe while we're debating some of the other proposed modifications or amendments, we can pull up the previous solar overlay amendment, and then we can also take a vote as to whether we would want to add that to the town warrant. Is that a reasonable approach? It sounds like people are, the general rationale to have both is to say, well, we already did this one, we thought we were moving forward with it. So I'm comfortable. I'd rather not make material changes to that, because I think we all know that's a can of worms that we've been down multiple times before. But if people want to discuss the warrants of adding the previous amendment to the town warrant as previously described, then let's discuss and vote on that.
I think that's fair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, I would put forth a motion to do just that, to move forward with the language in Article 31 as stated, and as Mary had provided additional detail, which allows for things around screening, noise, visual effects, and then have a placeholder for a second article which speaks specifically to a solar overlay district.
I'll second
Yes.
that.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Through the chair.
John, hang on, John, go ahead.
So my question is to the proponents of an overlay district, whether they would like to have an overlay district that identifies individual parcels, or if they would like to have a change to certain districts that allow solar in it. So the difference would be the old solar overlay map, which identifies the existing solar parcels and Harveys and whatnot. And then the other option would be changing the section 210-201 applicability to say this use is only allowed in the industrial A and industrial B district. And I say that because I'm wondering if there even needs to be a second article, because you could just modify the applicability section if it is for districts only. You can modify the applicability section in the hearing process versus a separate article. However, if you want to do a different overlay district, which individually identifies parcels, you would need a different article.
Fran, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, John, I'd prefer a separate article because if if it's challenged in court for whatever reason that overlay district is not legal, I would hope that our fallback would be that Article 31, which provides what is legally allowable in terms of the noise and the visual effects screening. Just my
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add on.
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
John, thank you. I think that was a good suggestion, but I would agree with Fran just to separate it. And to your point of two different options, let's discuss that as part of the other option. I mean, we're kind of open. It's just wanted to bring it back on the table for options for it.
Okay.
Through the chair, just clarification on that. A change that is only to allow solar in zoning districts would not be a zoning map change. It would be a zoning language change. A change to individual parcels would be a zoning map change. And those are two different things. With zoning map changes, you need to notify abutters of all the parcels that are being changed. With a language change, you don't. There's other certain requirements that need to go into that. So I don't know if you can go one or the other in that other article, right? It would only, I guess you could go one or the other in this article that's kind of shared on screen, but the map as an overlay map itself would be separate from putting it in certain districts.
So what I'm hearing is that if we're not going to include that change in this proposed article, then we would have to decide tonight as to what the alternative article is, so that for the actual public hearing, if it moved forward, we could notify the appropriate people.
So I think I know, through you, Mr. Chair, I think I know what John's saying. I think we can create the second article to be for a zoning district, and then if we choose the other route, we can come back and update this article.
Yes.
Okay. So what we have on the table is we have a motion to recommend or to amend Article 31, commercial solar photovoltaic installations as described in the draft article. We have a second. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
Through the chair, I had a question.
Yes, Sundar, go ahead.
So are we proposing that a zoning map be included as that second article? So I think I have good clarity on what Mary's, we've all worked on that. So the changes to the bylaw we're voting on, is the rest of the discussion to adopt a zoning district map as well? Is that what it is?
We're not discussing that as part of this motion, but we will be discussing that later tonight.
Okay, got it, okay.
Mr. Barker Hook, looked like you were going to serenade us, and you turned your camera on. I know you've done a ton of research, and you've been a passionate advocate for some changes here. But I just as a member of the public and as a member of the Zoning Advisory Committee, just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to introduce myself. Ted Barker Hook, 75 Grove Street, and a member of the advisory committee. What I would say to the members of the planning board is our last couple months were really, really difficult for me. I think you know where my heart was with this issue. I think you know that the overlay idea sprung from this head originally. If I could try to offer one more bit of clarification on why legal counsel gave us what they gave us. What legal counsel said is the state actively encourages specifically solar by law. It is in the law that they want solar development. And that's what makes it different from, we can say a car wash is in this district and not that district. If the state said we really, really need more car washes, we would have real trouble saying, well, you can only have a car wash in the downtown business district. That's what makes it different from all other businesses. And that, as much as I didn't want to hear that, I was also the one that proposed solar only in commercial districts, in the industrial, because it's a commercial use. I also, there's one other little bit of history that I'll share with you. We looked at Athol, and Athol recently passed a bylaw directly related to solar that said commercial solar installations can only be on previously disturbed land. So we spent some time talking about that and defining what previously disturbed land is. And then if there's a plot with previously disturbed land, the panels can only be on the previously disturbed part of the land and all sorts of stuff. And again, and I love that idea. And it passed at Athol. It has not been challenged in Athol. And while our legal counsel wouldn't say Athol will lose, he essentially suggested, I don't want to be the one defending that bylaw either. His clear message was, because the state has by statute encouraged commercial solar, it gets much more difficult to do the kind of things I was hoping we could do, like an overlay, like put it only in commercial, like say you can only do it on previously disturbed land, unless you said all development can only be on previously disturbed land. It was a hard message for me to hear, a very difficult message for me to hear. But in the end, I'm a high school history teacher. I'm not a lawyer. And I found his presentation convincing. I will say, and this was mentioned at the beginning, as long as you invited me to speak, Gary, that I feel like there's two parts to the new plan. One part is what you see in front of you, which hopefully protects neighborhoods. The second part is the just germinating tree clearing bylaw. And my hope is, if we can find a way to have both of these, it makes it very difficult to have more things like the Alexander Road Lumber Street, in my mind, fiasco that we had. I agree that what we have here does very little by itself to protect trees. And that's a really important piece of what I was hoping to achieve. I do think it could protect neighborhoods about as well as we can do. If we can also get a tree clear cutting bylaw passed, then we have both pieces of what our original intent was. And that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm talking to Amy Ritterbusch on the select board to try to help that discussion. So that's my input, and that's what I saw in the last couple months.
Thanks, Mr. Parker-Hook. Well spoken as always. So I know we've deviated a little bit, but I want to go back, and John has kindly put up on the screen proposed, this is not what we're voting on right now, so maybe if we can, just to not confuse people, if we can either get rid of this or go back to the language that that Zach has put forward. But just want to again clarify that what we're voting on here is to amend Article 31, commercial solar photovoltaic installations as described in the draft article. That was the this one here, and we will get to the second proposal shortly. So hearing no further discussion.
Hey, Gary, point of order. I thought Fran's motion was both. Just, I'm fine either way, but that's what I thought his motion was.
I was gonna say the same thing, Rob. I think the motion was for both. I'm fine doing it whatever way makes sense.
Fran, could you confirm what if your motion was to lump both of these together or to treat them separately?
It was initially to have them together, meaning two separate articles. But for clarity and for simplicity, maybe I'll make a friendly amendment and withdraw that second option, so that the proposal now would be only to address the changes in Article 31 as noted in the documentation.
Yeah, I think that's a cleaner process. As we've learned, when we blend things together, we don't want people to vote one down. It just gets messy.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I will second this motion because I don't think the first one was seconded. So I will second.
It was, but that's okay.
Okay, sorry. Who did that?
It's okay.
Whoever
Okay.
did it should second.
All right, so we have a motion from Fran, we have a second from Dave. And is there any further discussion? Is everybody clear what we're voting on here?
Yes.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, we'll do a roll call vote. Rob?
Rob Benson, yes. Great job, Mary. Team.
Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, I love it. Yes, thank you for all the hard work.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes. I was going to say no just to see if I could get a laugh.
Do
Deb?
it.
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary is a yes, motion carries. Okay, let's move to the second proposal. And John, if you can pull that up, and I apologize to flip screens, but just didn't, I'm glad we did because it gave us some clarity on what the motion was. So the second point of discussion here is to also modify or amend Article 31 to see if the town will vote to amend the zoning bylaws as follows: to amend Article 31 by striking the first sentence in its entirety and replace it with the following: for the purpose of this article, there is hereby established within the town of Hopkinton an overlay district referred to as CSPVOD, delineated on a map entitled Commercial Solar Photovoltaic Overlay District, Town of Hopkinton, dated January 2020. The map is hereby made part of the Town of Hopkinton zoning bylaw and is on file with the office of the town clerk. Construction and use of a commercial solar photovoltaic installation or any part thereof shall be permitted solely in areas within the CSPVOD and shall be governed by this article. So let me ask you, to the proponents of this, and I realize that we don't have the map pulled up, and I don't know if John can dig that up as well, but is this what you would like to move forward as a secondary article?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think this is Fran's motion, and this is exactly what I had in mind. And I don't think we should bring up the map because it'll generate tons of discussion. I think we should just get this as a placeholder. Or did we want to discuss everything tonight, or did we want to discuss it at a subsequent meeting?
Yeah, I guess that's a fair question. Maybe we don't need to bring up the map because I appreciate you, John, but I think that's a good point. We're only voting as to whether or not we will want to add this to the town meeting warrant. As it is a map, then it would require notice of all of the owners and abutting properties. So probably best to not have the discussion now and have that in the public hearing. Before I comment, does anybody else from the board want to comment on this proposal?
Through the chair.
Yes, Sundar, go ahead.
This was the reason I asked the previous question. So a lot of the legal guidance was provided for the previous bylaw changes that we just voted on. So my curiosity is around, does this have to go through the same kind of scrutiny by town council, or is that not the case?
Yes, it will have to go through the scrutiny of town council. It's just that they haven't been through it yet, other than the comments that they provided that we went through the public hearing process last year.
Okay, so that doesn't preclude us from voting tonight on this, fully expecting that the next stage would be legal counsel providing us guidance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just respond to that, Mr.
Sure,
Chair?
Dave.
So I think Sundar, the point was made tonight that our legal counsel does not support this article. So that's something we would discuss as part of this when we discuss it further.
Got it. That I knew that, Dave. That's why I asked. So that's why I was confused. Okay, but thanks for clarifying that.
All right, Jane.
Yeah, I was just going to point that out, that town council has already stated that this would not hold up.
Precisely. Yeah. So I was just curious why we are doing it if we are
want to bring this up.
Okay.
Are there other comments from planning board members?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Frank.
So I was the one that initially proposed to add this. And I think it's important that we as a board view this and look at the context of it. And then I think upon reflection, given the work that's been done by Zach and other comments through the board members here and other members of the public, I would like it to go to a vote. I will let everybody know that I'm going to vote in the negative for this, but I just wanted to have that on the record. And I think it's important, if it does not go forward, that when people ask the question of this group and of this board, why wasn't this considered? We can kind of say, yes, it was considered. There was work done by Zach, it was reviewed by council, feedback from members of the public, and based on all the evidence and information, right? We voted as collectively as a group. So I'll leave my comments at that.
Mr. Gelsich.
Not really pertinent to the vote on this, but I just want people to be aware that if this were to get voted, to be added to the warrant. I don't know if this would be able to be heard on March 1st because there would be additional abutter notifications. We've already placed the ad in the newspaper for the hearings for all the other articles, I believe, or we've got it ready. So I don't know if the timing will work out. So this may be open. The hearing may happen after the other zoning articles, if that matters to anybody, because that would just give a shorter amount of time for debate.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? I have some comments, but I see Mr. Barker Hook has his hand raised. But Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for honoring me. I just wanted to point out in response to Fran as well that as a board, the 9-member board, we spent months and months and perhaps even a year talking about this article and its proposed. And I would hate tonight to not have a chance to talk more about it, and just in the short time, the 30 minutes that we talked about it tonight, just nix all the hard work that we did. So that's my thought process.
Yeah. Okay. Deb?
Yeah, I was very aware of the wordsmithing and the logistics that Ted had put together with the tree cutting proposal. And if you look at the way it's worded and the percentages of lot allowed to be cleared and for what reason, I think it's covered most of our concerns. So I'm not in favor of keeping the districts, and I am in favor of the wordsmithing of the proposal of the solar.
Yeah. And really quickly, before we go to Mr. Barker Hook, I just want to provide my comments on this. In case you couldn't guess, I feel pretty strongly against moving this forward. To Dave's point, we did spend a lot of time talking about this, and I don't know if we ever really reached a point of clarity in which I was comfortable with it. There were always inherent problems with it, and you know, and I while I agree with the intention of it, you know, personally, I think that the language that the ZAC group came up with, I think, puts us in a much stronger position than even an overlay does. And I think that's in part because it is addressing one of the two true concerns that we have with solar. And that in itself makes it a very, very defensible position. So I respect our town council and their guidance. I respect our zoning advisory committee and all of the heart and soul that they've put into this. And for me, I'm inclined to follow their recommendations here. So applaud, and I think it's right to take a vote, and I'll certainly represent the board if we vote otherwise, but that's just my perspective on it. All right, Muriel.
So just a last statement. I'm a little concerned that anybody would think that wanting to have one last conversation on this means any disrespect to anybody. I absolutely value the work that went into this. I absolutely value our town professionals, always have. And I think that I think that this board, a couple members are just asking for the opportunity to have one more conversation on this to understand it. And we had our shot with Zach, and I wish that I had been more better informed about the changes that were being contemplated. And I have to believe that the town wanted the opportunity to talk about this too.
Yeah, fair point, Muriel. And I apologize. Wasn't my intention to say that they weren't being respected, but I probably should have worded that differently, that I'm inclined to align with their recommendation as opposed to something otherwise. So I apologize if I offended anybody with my comments. Rob?
So through the chair, one last comment. Anytime you need to make decisions 3-4 months in advance in the world we live in today, it's just best practice to have as much flexibility as you can. And that's the whole purpose that I'm looking for, is as much flexibility on what we put on the town warrant. And the second part is, it's all about legal precedent. If a court case gets brought before Athol, before Weston, before Wellesley, and there's precedent, our legal counsel will give us different advice. And the longer we can kind of go down this path where there might be legal precedent set, it's just better practice. It's not, I'm not saying that putting this article on the town warrant at the town meeting is the best thing to do. But I'm saying right now, today, it gives us more time. It gives more time for it gives us more time to discuss it. And it gives us more time for legal precedent to be set.
All right, Mr. Barker Hook, we can unmute you.
Again, Ted Barker, Hook 75 Grove Street. Just a final thought or two. Number one, I just want to clarify something. Town council did not say that the overlay would fail in a court hearing. Town council said, I am skeptical that it would hold up. But he made very clear that he did not say any of our proposals would fail. That's an important, I think, distinction. That said, I was convinced by what he had to say, but I'm all for, again, I think that most of the board knows where my heart is on this. I'm all for continuing the discussion. I think it's worth continuing. And maybe the hardest thing for me when I gave up on the overlay a week ago was knowing that there were a lot of people under the tent at the high school in October that were absolutely expecting that that vote was going to come up again in May. And some asked me about it, and I assured them it may be changed a little bit, but yes, it will be back in May. And for me, that was a really difficult pill to swallow, knowing how many people are going to potentially feel that there's a bait and switch. So I hope that the planning board does continue a discussion on it. I will say that town council convinced me that it might not be the best path, but it's certainly what I wish we could do. And again, he did not say it would fail. He said, I think it would be a tough thing to defend. Those are two very different things.
All right, so
I give my final comment.
if it's unique and different, yes, go ahead, Dave.
So first of all, thank you for all the positive comments, and I hate all the negative comments, but no, just teasing. Some people said it very well, my thinking, and my final thought is just that, right or wrong, I think all those towns that Rob mentioned are much better off than us right now because they have at least something. And, you know, when we get that tree cutting bylaw, maybe we vote to remove this districting or whatever. But to Rob's point, we have nothing right now, and this gives us something for tree cutting. Thank you.
All right, does anybody else want the final word? Okay. So if not, then I will entertain a motion to amend Article 31, commercial solar photovoltaic installations, as discussed in this second discussion per the previous proposed zoning amendment. Is that
They're so moved?
John? Okay. Sundar with the motion, is there a second?
Second.
Muriel with the second. And I'm going to assume there's no, oh, Fran's got some discussion.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman, is it amending Article 31 or is it actually creating a new article?
It is amending
Fine.
Article 31, Section 201.
Okay.
All right. Any other further questions, any other discussions or further discussion or questions?
So wait, so on Fran's point, so this article is a substitution for the other article. It's not both articles. It's not independently of each other. So we just moved that we were going to vote for the first one. Now we're voting for the second one, but not in place of the other one as a separate one altogether.
That's correct. So we could still move forward with both of these.
Okay.
Or one of them.
That was your point, right, Fran?
It was, right? I think the first one's already moved through,
Yeah, okay.
right?
But it's
Yes.
also that
Well, it's moved through to a public hearing.
That's
they're,
right,
yeah,
correct.
they're not being presented, if I may, as separate articles that could coexist if both voted, aye at town meeting. Right now, they are presented and written as either or. So if we voted to send them both to town meeting, then only one of them could exist unless we make the second article a new bylaw.
So
Mr.
now
Chair.
I'm really
Yeah,
confused.
can you,
Mr.
So
Chair,
let's just make sure we know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
understand,
I don't
John,
know.
can you go ahead and clarify?
I don't know if that's true. So if town meeting were to pass the language change, I'm going to call them the language change and the map change. If town meeting were to pass the language change first, and that's accepted, and then pass the map change, the language change would stay in place. However, the applicability of that section would apply only to the areas on the map. So all of any new solar development that would go on would only be allowed in the certain areas that are shown on the map, and would then require all of the new analyses and everything else dealing with screening moving forward.
Can you pull up the language of the second one? The solar overlay.
Yes.
I'd appreciate that.
Through the chair, I think there's a little confusion because we want two warrant articles pointing to the same zoning article.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
So
I just want to make sure one doesn't.
So
Just-
all this changes.
Applicability. Okay, so the key is that it's only amending the applicability section.
Correct.
Okay, it's not amending the entire bylaw. Okay, thank you very much.
So-
That means that what I stated is incorrect.
So counter to what I just said, if the language one doesn't get passed and this one does get passed, nothing changes in the bylaw except for where solar can be allowed.
Right.
No new analyses or screening requirements or anything like that are going to apply to new solar developments.
Good. Got it.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, we've had some discussion. Are we ready to vote? Okay, so with no further discussion, we will vote. Mr. Benson,
Rob Benson, yes.
Ms. Kramer,
Earl Kramer, yes.
Ms. Moran,
No,
Mr. Paul,
yes.
Ms. Larson Marlowe,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ms. Feinberg,
Ms. Feinberg, no.
Mr. Savarman,
So the Sivaraman, yes.
Mr. Dion,
Never done this before, everybody. I vote yes. I'm switching.
Sundar already saved us.
and Mr. Trendle is a no. So that is 6 yes and 3 no, so the motion carries.
Could I just have one moment, Mr. Chair?
Please.
I just want to thank everybody for a respectful conversation that was also challenging. And I want to explicitly say that I am so appreciative of everybody's work on other committees, but especially Mary's and the work on the ZAC. This is no reflection whatsoever of any dissatisfaction with the level of effort. And I will go back and watch those meetings. And I apologize to the public and to my board members that I didn't follow it more closely leading up to this. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks, Mary. Well said. Okay, so those are the tough ones. Mary.
Yes, do we have a, let's see.
I guess a question for the group. I'm wondering how people feel about grouping these remaining
Yes.
article changes together.
Love it.
I see thumbs up. I will assure you that in the public hearing process, we will vote on them individually, but for purposes of putting them on the article or on the town warrant, do you want to go through quickly what each of them are, or are we comfortable?
You know, we did discuss them many times.
We did. We did.
For you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I did want to point out, though, that Muriel unintentionally brought the solar articles to the top, even though she wasn't trying to do that. And that was a win-win.
Good.
All right, so on that note, then I will entertain a motion to amend Article 19, non-conforming lots, uses and structures, section 210-128, to allow for a waiver issued by the zoning enforcement officer for certain uses that do not alter the footprint of overall height of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. Also to modify Article 16, wireless telecommunication facilities, in order to bring the regulations current with federal wireless telecommunications regulations. Also to modify Article 18, supplemental regulations, section 210-126, to remove the requirement that occupants of accessory dwelling units be family, quote, related by blood, marriage, or adoption. And also to remove the requirement for an interior connection and to remove the age restricted provision. Also to modify Article 6A, downtown business district, section 210-20.3, to remove car washes as a use allowed by special permit. Also to amend Article 8A, Industrial B IB District, Section 210-37.9, to correct the numbering so as to be consistent with the rest of the zoning bylaw. And to amend Article 27, signs, to allow for temporary signs for businesses during construction in the right of way.
So moved.
Rob Benson is the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Muriel with the second. Is there any further discussion? In light of none, we will move to a vote. Mr. Benson, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Ms. Kramer?
Carol Kramer, yes.
Ms. Moran?
Jane Moran, yes.
Mr. Paul?
Dave Paul, yes.
Ms. Larson Marlowe?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ms. Feinberg?
Ms. Feinberg, yes.
Mr. Savarman?
Subramanian, yes.
I'm not getting it right tonight. I'm sorry, Sundar.
No, it's good.
Mr. DeYoung?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So again, I'll echo Muriel's comments. Appreciate the good, healthy dialogue. It's one of the things that makes this board, I think, great. And again, I apologize if my words, if anybody took offense to my comments, wasn't my intent. I'm going to feel a little bit bad about that for some time. But,
Oh, no. That was not the point.
No need to discuss it further. Mr. Gelsich, you had a comment?
Yeah, so just before we move on, I wanted to clarify something with the zoning overlay. The map that we have in place is the map that will be advertised for the hearing. I just want everyone to know that. Because if we make changes during the hearing and add new parcels, we will then have to notify abutters and hold another hearing for those new abutters, much like we did before.
Yeah.
So if anyone, I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with that and no one was surprised when we have the same map that was from last year.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
Quick question, John. So if we don't make any changes, no notifications need to be sent out and there's much less work?
No, notifications need to be sent out now for the parcels that are on the map.
Okay.
If during the hearing, there are new parcels that are suggested to be added. Those would then also need to be sent out to abutters and a new hearing would have to be held.
Okay. Thank you.
Muriel.
I have a question about that. So it's all about the timing of when we have the public hearing for the overlay map, if we choose to go forward with it. So what we advocated for tonight was the opportunity to have one more conversation about whether what the planning board wants. Is there a possibility for that conversation before the needed public hearing so we can avoid the expense of notifying abutters if we don't go forward with it?
I'd have to check with town manager's office about the timing, but what was voted tonight was to add it to the warrant. So it's on the warrant. So now the next step is to hold a hearing.
Right.
Whether the board can, the board can certainly have another meeting and say, well, actually, I'd have to check because I don't know if the determination to remove it from the warrant needs to be had at a meeting.
I don't mean to make it more convoluted. I was just, if there was an opportunity for avoiding the expense of the notifications, that's the only reason I asked the question, but I want it to be done by the book, obviously.
I'll have to check. I'll have to check with Kobe and just see what the timing is for the hearing notice and the abutter notice, because it is scheduled for March 1st for the other articles. So if we can make it for then, it'll be obviously a tighter timeline. But we do have meetings we have a meeting on February 8th where we could potentially have another discussion, and I have to check to see what the process is to remove it from the warrant. But it is possible.
So I guess just my preference, we've talked about the zoning overlay a lot. If we're gonna, and I appreciate the board's thoughts that we want to continue that conversation. I prefer to just have that conversation in the public hearing process. And to John's point, we could talk about it on February 8th. And then we could maybe we could make a decision at that point. We could notice it and have a public hearing on it at some point later in March. But again, I feel like we're going to continue to debate the same pros and cons and discussion on this. And I don't know if that's the best use of our time. So I appreciate the fact that we want to discuss it. I just assume let's do that in the public hearing format. Get it all out on the table and come up with what we think is the best way forward.
I don't disagree. I just kind of wanted to push it around a little bit to see if it could be, but I think you're right. It makes better sense to just be totally straightforward.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Okay. I think the last couple of items we have should be relatively quick. The first was a planning board funding request update. And I want to thank Mr. Gelsich for putting together a very articulate and well-written request for our $50,000 for support for the trail and pedestrian connectivity plan, and another $10,000 to support the open space and recreation plan. John, do you just want to quickly share where we're at in the budget cycle?
Yeah, so town manager submitted the consolidated draft budget to select board. And in that there was, so the requests for funding are grouped by department. So all of these were within the land use budget. The land use budget was $35,000, which we can assume was $10,000 for the OSRP, which is what we requested, and $25,000 for the trails and pedestrian connectivity plan. So Gary and I had talked separately about the potential for a reduced scope for the trails and connectivity plan. But it looks like what's in the budget is not the full 50,000 that was requested.
And also just to clarify, the budget is not final. That's in the initial budget proposal. Right. So there could be further changes, but at least we've got a little bit of, we've got some budget and something to do with. And I think that we'll end up taking that back to our subcommittees to figure out or to start thinking about how we might best use that. Fran.
Through the chair, I can't remember, Gary, are these new requests or are these requests that we've done on an annual basis in the past?
These are new requests. We do have a standing line item, which, John, was it a $10,000 or $15,000 that carries over from year to year?
Yeah, I believe it's $15,000. It's a first come, first serve line item expense on the land use department. So planning board could use it, Concom could use it, any group within land use could use it, or a portion of it.
And does the remainder roll over? Does it fall into the Gelsich family fund?
If only. I don't know the answer to that. If it gets used, I would assume the remainder rolls over, and then the balance to bring it back up to 15,000 is requested. But I don't know the answer to that.
And I will say, I know another subcommittee of ours, the Economic Growth Study Committee, put forth a recommendation for a contract economic development office, and we discussed and voted in our support of that. It's my understanding that is not in the current budget, but there will likely be some further discussion. We did discuss it at the select board meeting last week. But I just bring that up because I think it's worth noting that, going into a year into a pandemic, The town is in a hiring freeze, although they are making a few recommendations outside of that. But I think it is a very challenging year, given a lot of additional expense that the town is incurring, and our select board is, and our town manager's office is doing their best to, to balance a lot of competing priorities. So I don't think there's much more to be said there, but I think it's a good sign that we at least initially have some additional working budget. Moving on, the planning board annual report review. John?
So every year, we have to provide annual reports for all the different boards and committees. We will make this one look a lot nicer, but this is basically the information that goes into it. It's a summary of what the planning board did in the previous year. There were 10 applications for A&Rs, only 2 lots created, only because a lot of those were non-buildable parcels. I think 4 special permits, a couple subdivisions, some stormwater management permits, site plans. All of these I'm sure look very familiar to you guys. Minor site plans, garden apartment site plan, earth removal permits, scenic road decisions. No town meeting articles since they were basically tabled, and welcoming back Fran DeYoung and Sundar, and then saying goodbye to Frank and Amy. And we put some other narrative in it. But if anyone has any changes to this, please let me know, because these are due in like 2 days.
Okay.
John, only Fran was a welcome back. I was a welcome. Just kidding. That's okay.
You were reelected, right?
No, this is my first time.
Okay.
He's a newbie.
Okay, thank you, John. Next item up is Mr. Paul has requested a discussion around a name change for the planning board, from the planning board to the planning and zoning board. So, Mr. Paul, do you just want to quickly tell us about what you're thinking here?
Sure. This could be a brief discussion. I just wanted to put it out there as a possibility. To me, whenever I thought what board I'm on, I tell people what board I'm on. I tell them on the planning board, and they really don't associate that with the zoning and all the stuff that goes with that. So I was just wondering if people thought there was an appetite to call ourselves the planning and zoning board. I think that's to it. If anybody has some comments, or whether they think it's a good idea, a bad idea, it won't hurt my feelings. Just wanted to put it out there, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to present it.
All right, Mr. Gelsich, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
I was thinking the same thing, John.
My first inclination is just that while we do deal with a lot of zoning, it could be confusing to be called the Planning and Zoning Board and then have a Zoning Board of Appeals also in the same department. It kind of mixes up the purposes in some people's minds. That's just my first inclination.
Is it set by statute?
It is. I don't know if the name is set by statute. They do in the statute call it the planning board, but I don't know if there's any restrictions on changing the actual name.
I don't either.
I think, just a quick comment, I think some other towns actually call themselves a zoning board, right?
There is a zoning board of appeals.
That's for appeals, not a.
I've seen, and I don't, it's not the same type of committee that you see in like cities like Newton, but Newton did have a planning and development board. It wasn't elected, so it wasn't the same as a planning board. But I've seen that.
And Jane?
Sure. So I've been watching a lot of the ZAC operations lately, and it seems to me that they're a separate and individual body that meets regularly for very specific reasons and they have their own purpose. And so does planning. It's very separate. It's more of a broad stroke. I don't see how, if we combine the two, we could get all of that work done. I think that that's why planning originally subdivided Zach and put it as a subcommittee so that they could come back and, you know, do all of their work, which is enormous. I mean, if you had just had the opportunity to watch them in the last 2 or 3 months, the work that they're doing is really enormous. And I just don't see how practically we could accomplish all of this if we put it all on one committee.
For you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
I wasn't talking about changing the roles of either the ZAC committee or our planning board. I was talking simply a name change. And to me, you know, I don't think we need to discuss this a lot. I just thought, you know, if there was like, hey, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about it some more. But I think we should just kind of close the discussion.
Yeah. And Dave, I do applaud you for bringing it up. And I know we all struggle because people come to us with a lot of things that they assume that we do, that we don't. But, you know, to your recommendation, I think it's probably best that we don't right now. And just thinking about all the work that would be associated with changing this, not to mention confusion, not only around Zach, but also around the Zoning Board of Appeals and what those are. I think it could get very confusing. So
just one final comment I would say to people though, like just looking at what I'm doing right here, if you have an idea, bring it to the board, because the worst that can happen is a quick discussion and nothing happens of it. Or it could evolve into something that's great, you know, so.
Yep, absolutely. And on that note, I just want to thank Mr. Paul for pulling papers to run for another 5 years on the planning board. Mr.
No pressure,
DeYoung,
Rob.
Mr. DeYoung, is there any news on your end?
The wheels are in motion, Mr. Chairman. The wheels are in motion.
All right. And Mr. Benson, are there any activity with regards to your seat, or? We can't hear you, Rob.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, so I am going to run. And for a 5-year term, I just need to figure out how to get the 50 signatures in this COVID environment.
That's great news, you guys. I really appreciate that that's happening. Rob, shoot me an email. We can help you. We're working on a plan to try and get signatures in a COVID safe way.
Awesome.
And Fran too, if you want to. And Dave. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Meryl, for offering that up. And I just that's a great idea, because at least if these can be combined in some way as appropriate, that might be a really efficient way, because it's candidly none of us are seeing a whole lot of people face to face.
You know that you can email the town clerk and get the papers contact list, right? They'll be sent to you, emailed to you.
So I just wanted
Mr. Chair, I somehow managed to get elected without 50 signatures. I don't know how that actually happened, but maybe there was some.
You were nominated by the Democratic Caucus.
Party. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That does not
Okay.
require signatures.
Okay.
He says, "How did I get here?" What exactly happened?
I didn't really try, but
Yeah.
And I'm sure Rob and Fran know that John always reminds us to get like 60 signatures in case a couple of our out.
Yeah.
through the chair.
Yes.
I just wanted to give a quick update on the tree protection clear cutting bylaw. And it is just an update. It is not for us to discuss because it's not technically on the agenda, but it was part of the, the efforts around solar. And town council did research and drafted some optional bylaws. One that involves getting a special permit, one that does not. We didn't have any time at ZAC to review it because of the many changes that we were going through with solar in the last several weeks. And but we felt it was important enough to try to discuss it perhaps at this year's town meeting. Amy Ritterbusch is presenting it at select board. I don't know if they would vote for it to have a placeholder on the warrant. But if they do, I also don't know if it would be classified as a general bylaw or a zoning bylaw. If it's a zoning bylaw, obviously we would have it then on our public hearing list. And if it's general bylaw, then we wouldn't need to worry about it. But that's, John, do you have anything else, beyond that to add?
Amy sent some emails tonight. I haven't had a chance to read them because I'm at the meeting, but I think there's some confusion as to whether select board or planning board is going to take the lead on these. So I don't know what the deal is with that. But if it doesn't work out, since they were kind of drafted and sent to us the day of the last Zach meeting, if it doesn't work out for this town meeting, I'm sure Zach will be happy to take it up for the next town meeting or a special town meeting if it should come up.
We definitely would in Zach, but if we wanted to address it in this year and not wait another year, then, we might have to discuss it at the next meeting, so.
Provide a little bit more context for people, and Mary alluded to this. It could be a general bylaw, which would apply across all zoning. What's interesting is that a general bylaw only requires a 51% vote at town meeting to adopt, whereas if it was a zoning specific bylaw, it would require a 2/3 vote. So just some, I think, to the comments already made, there's some back and forth as to where this belongs. But in the end, there's certainly merits to it being brought up through both the select board or potentially the planning board, and that's what they're trying to work out now as to where the best place is for it.
There's an existing tree protection bylaw that is a general bylaw, I believe. So that tree protection bylaw doesn't really protect anything but some public trees, but nonetheless, it is a general bylaw. So.
I see Mr. Barker Hook has his hand raised. I do want to caution, because this is not on our agenda, so we don't really want to have any debate on this. But that being said, Mr. Barker Hook, if you had some additional perspective, again, we're not going to debate it, but if you have some additional perspective, be more than happy to hear your thoughts.
Super quick, I don't want to keep people too late. Ted Barker Hook, 75 Grove Street. I did some research into other Massachusetts towns with more extensive tree protection bylaws, and I didn't see any unanimity. Some towns did it through planning board, some towns did it through general bylaws, through zoning bylaws, some through general bylaws. It looked like, for the towns I could find, it was about 50-50. So. Okay.
Thank you, Ted.
Just one question, just for concerning the update, not really discussing it. Is there a time limit or is there a timeliness factor if in fact it was on the warrant this year, either from planning board or from the select board?
So the warrant is due on February 2nd. And I'm just going to throw this out there because I know that I think this board would have a lot of interest in it. And I guess this is a question for John, but if this is on the select board agenda for tomorrow at night and the select board chooses not to move this forward, is there any pathway where we could call a meeting with proper notification and still have that debate and potential proposal to move this forward prior to February 2nd?
Let's see. If they
to look at my calendar.
Tomorrow.
So tomorrow's the 26th.
Yep. So we wouldn't be able to, we could post a meeting for Thursday, tomorrow morning, and have it as a standing meeting.
But we could have a meeting on the 1st, correct?
could have a meeting on the 1st, but that would be kind of tricky to get something in writing by the morning of the 2nd.
Does it have to be in by the morning of the 2nd, or does it have to be in?
I'd have to check what the deadline is, but I think it's the morning. I'm not sure.
Okay, so we would have to meet then on the could we meet on the 28th in the evening? If we posted the meeting tomorrow?
48 hours.
Yes.
Yeah, so
The meeting tomorrow, we could meet on the 28th.
So I think that's a decent idea. How do other board members feel about that?
Yes.
Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. I see lots of thumbs up. Fran's not
I have
sure.
a mixed response.
Dave's not sure.
I don't necessarily want to set the precedent that we're going to sort of second guess the select board ahead of time, but I guess I'd
Right.
rather express confidence that they'll put it on the warrant for discussion, because I think that it's pretty established that people want to see it.
So let's do this then. And I think that's a fair point, Marielle. And again, just trying to work through our processes as they're intended here.
Yeah.
Maybe what we should do is, certainly doesn't hurt for all of us to have a position on this, to email the select board tomorrow in advance of the meeting. If people want to speak on behalf as individuals, they can certainly do so. Personally, I have a conflict tomorrow night, so I will not be able to speak on behalf of the planning board. But let's work it through its process. If for some reason the select board chooses not to, then we'll evaluate whether we could have a meeting on the 1st. And I think that, John, that's up to my discretion as the chair to schedule that meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, and it doesn't have a time deadline for February 2nd, so we could potentially meet on the 1st and have time to submit it on the next day.
It's an excellent suggestion, though, to get your feedback in to the select board ahead of time if you feel strongly about it.
Yeah.
Where, through the chair, where's the tree cut? Where's the tree amendment? Where can I find this?
It's in the select board packet.
It's also in our packet for tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yep. Administrative packet under the 125, I believe.
Good stuff.
Okay, it's 9:20, so I do want to keep moving forward, but I think that's worthwhile discussion. I did want to just quickly update the board on our subcommittee updates, and these are specific to our 3 initiatives for 2021. And I can go ahead and start with the trails and pedestrian connectivity. We had an initial meeting, and I think we were very fortunate to have a few members from Open Space and from HALT join us. And certainly have some more work to do. And candidly, I need to set up another meeting. But we at least had some good, healthy discussion about what we wanted to achieve. We also established some goals for the committee or for the subcommittee. And really quickly, those were 1, to update the master plan and the OSRP, which is a separate project, to incorporate more specific language to support pedestrian and trail connectivity. The second was to make some recommended bylaw changes within our zoning to Zach, again, to support building of trails, which I think is something that we talk a lot about, but our zoning doesn't necessarily provide a lot of clarity on what developers need to do. The third was to complete a map of all sidewalks and trails in town, so that we have an inventory of what's out there today. The fourth, it was to identify high priority connectivity areas, is what we're calling it. And I think there's a lot of input that goes into that. also some evaluation of, where there is the greatest opportunity for us to make some improvements as far as connectivity. And then the fifth one was to, for some of you that may recall, a little while back, we did a sidewalk survey. We'd actually like to redo that survey. And while I'm not a fan of redoing things that we've done somewhat recently, I think that the reality is that in the pandemic, a lot more people are walking and using sidewalks and using trails. And I think that there's very likely a different perspective on the role that this plays for us now than there was even a year ago. So, all in all, we've got some additional engagement that we need to do, in particular with the Trails Coordination and Management Committee, the Trails Club. We talked about involving somebody from the running club. We talked a little bit about long-term vision. But for 2021, our end goal was really to identify those high priority connectivity areas and start to build out a plan to further improve connectivity.
Well said, Gary.
Okay. And again, we can move on. The open space and recreation plan. Fran or somebody else have a quick update on that process? And Fran, you're muted.
All right, yeah, Mr. Chair, I can add some color in terms of what we've done so far as a group, and Rob and Deb, feel free to jump in with points that I may have missed. We actually got together last week. We also had in attendance Steve Lewandowski, who's a member of the Open Space Preservation Committee, who has done a lot of work on his own. And Mr. Gelsich was also present in the meeting. But Steve's done a lot of work just identifying open parcels. And what we're going to do is really we identify our goals, update the existing document or plan, and work with John to do that, determine what our key priorities are and the action steps going forward. So kind of in this initial discussion, it was really kind of laying the groundwork, understanding what's been done so far, or kind of understanding the baseline, I should say, and then action steps going forward, reaching out to other groups, similar to what Mr. Chairman, you had talked about with the Trails Connectivity Group, but we think there's folks from Parks and Rec that we want to kind of get some feedback from as well, and include them in addition to feedback from the Growth Study Committee members, and also the Open Space Preservation Group as well. So we've got some upcoming meetings scheduled, but more work to be done. And this is a longer term plan for this group, working with Mr. Gelsich to provide kind of a broader update on the recreation plan that was last updated in 2013. 2013. Yep. So Rob, Deb, anything I may have missed?
Nope. Well said. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. And then our third committee on affordable housing. If you guys had a chance to meet.
Last night.
It was close, but we did it.
Yep.
Great.
Go ahead, Muriel. You could give it.
So we met and we talked a little bit about just getting ourselves acclimated to what is in place. So we have a little bit of research to do with John and perhaps a couple other people in town hall. John, I think it was you, but I could be casting aspersions. I think I remember you telling us about a regional approach that was being considered for affordable housing. So I can ask you quickly about that, but we wanted to take time, not in this meeting, to reach out and find out more about that for one thing.
Yeah, I can quickly say, talk about that. It's Regional Housing Services Office. There's one in place, I forget, somewhere near us in Central Mass. But it's more for monitoring of affordable housing.
Yeah.
The existing affordable housing. It's not for the creation of affordable housing. So if the goal of the committee is to find ways to create affordable housing, they will help, but they will not do that task. And it hasn't been put in place yet, but it's definitely still being discussed. SWAP, the Southwest Advisory something, which is our regional organization within MAPC, is what is looking into it, along with TRIC, which is the TRIC. I forget what they stand for. Same type of thing, but a little farther east. Looking to see if we can get an RHSO between those communities. But that's still in the works.
So we're going to spend a little time getting up to speed on acronyms, clearly, first. But so we wanted to understand that and make sure that we incorporated whatever was new in that realm in our thinking and our planning and reporting. And we have set another meeting, and I reached out to at least one member of the Affordable Housing Committee task force. I'm not sure the name of it, in town. So we're going to have them at our next meeting so that we can make sure that we're working in complete concert with the committee in town that's charged with affordable housing. And then we wanted to spend a little time talking about the possibilities of not just inspiring, creating, and protecting affordable housing by the state's definition, but spend a little time talking about and using a different nomenclature, but housing that crosses the span of affordability. It's the wrong word, but just broadening our discussion and thinking in terms of ways to make different tiers of housing costs potentially available in town, if that was something that was possible. And I think we would have to use a different name for it because affordable has a distinct meaning by state statute that we want to just be clear about.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I appreciate the impromptu updates. I'm really excited about all three of these and happy that everyone had a chance to meet. You know, I think it makes sense to continue, just in the interest of communication, that we continue to provide these updates. And if we can keep them quick like this, then I think that's just a great way for us to be informed about progress as we work through the course of the year. So thanks, everyone. The last item on our agenda tonight is we have some minutes from December 7th and December 16th. On the December 7th minutes, Muriel was kind enough to send over some minor changes. Just on page 7, earth removal, rephrased to say move to close. And then also on page 7, please add, Ms. Kramer noted for the record that Mr. Mastriani has made a good faith effort to create additional affordable housing units in town and had found it very difficult to do. The requested change in number of units to be developed reduced the number of affordable units or equivalent in lieu payments from 3 to 2 for the development. So are there any other proposed modifications for the December 7th minutes? And if not, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the modifications noted by Muriel and just read by me.
I'll move them.
Second that.
Muriel with the motion, Fran with the second. And assuming no further discussion, Mr. Benson, how do you vote?
Benson, yes.
Boy, I just lost my cheat sheet with my order. There it is.
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Muriel. Jane.
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave.
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb.
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Sundar.
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Fran.
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle's a yes. And then on the December 16th minutes, I had also a minor recommended change from Muriel. and that is on page 4 with regards to Zero Hayden Row, that houses, quote, planned to be far enough apart to allow for snow storage. Any other?
I sent one in too. Let me see what it said. I'd have to get out of my full screen. Did you get that, John or Stephanie? Yeah, it was just a minor phrasing revision to something I said. I can't get out of my. Sorry.
Steph, do you have those? Do you have that recommended change?
I do, through the chair. So on the December 16th minutes, page 4, first paragraph, second to last line, Ms. Feinberg asked if this is a true open space plan being provided as, and then she has highlighted, it has seemingly extensive wetlands.
Okay. All right. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes for December 16th with the minor changes noted by Muriel and Deb.
So moved.
Motion
Rob
from
Benson,
Muriel
second.
and Sundar. Do you want to second that?
Sure.
Okay.
Second.
And assuming no further discussion, Mr. Benson, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Muriel?
Carol Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
First, I want to say, Gary, you're doing a great job pronouncing my last name. I vote yes. Yes.
Dave, how do you vote?
Yes, I voted yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trundle is a yes. And on that note, does anybody have any final remarks before I entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening?
None.
All right, then does anyone want to move that question?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, so we no further discussion. Mr. Benson, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Muriel?
Carol Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Mary's in the mountains. I don't know. Is she close? Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary is a yes. So thanks everyone. And again, thanks to HCAM, to Mr. Barker Hook and our staff. Have a good night and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Take
Good
care,
job.
everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Well done, Gary.